Hello, Donna here. Thank you for tuning into my channel for this basic tutorial. Today we're going to be doing a laser transfer. Yep, not an inkjet, a laser. Now here you see what we're going to do. It is an advertisement. I think it's a French advertisement, maybe. Anyway, and here are more. Here are beads that have been covered with clay onto which I made transfers. All right. Now, when you're selecting imagery, of course, you can use your own imagery. That's always a good idea. But if you want to use things like these nifty advertisements, then there are places you can go. You can find copyright-free imagery. And I actually got these from a place called Free Vintage Posters, and it was wonderful. They were free vintage posters, but as many good things on the internet go, I can't find it anymore. Somebody probably bought it. Somebody probably bought the images. It probably doesn't even exist anymore. So I went and I Googled, and I found this. Picryl.com, Picryl.com, and it is a search engine for copyright-free imagery, and they have wonderful images. Everything from textile patterns, posters, it's really great. So it's a good source for you to get images, interesting images. I'll leave that right there. Now, of course, I made this myself. I printed it myself. And because it's a surface transfer, put it face down and transfer the image. Of course, if there's any text, you have to flip it. So in your computer, you flip it and then you print it. Okay, so we can get started. Now, what I have here is POLYCLAY on scrap that I've rolled through setting number 2 on my machine. And so it's not terribly thin. I'm going to actually use it to make a hollow tapering form. So setting number 2 is just fine. It's substantial enough. It will hold up. It will support itself, but it's not so thick. Okay, let's put it face down on the clay. Now, when you transfer, you want to transfer onto a light colored clay. And the reason you transfer on light colors is because if you transfer on a dark color, you won't see it. You see, the ink is not opaque. It's transparent. Okay. The paper I'm using, I don't really think about the paper. I just use regular printing paper. And I have to say that sometimes I have an easier time than others, because you have to remember, the people who are the companies making the paper want the ink to stick to the paper. We don't want that. We want the ink to come off of the paper. So in some ways, try very cheap paper. Just try the cheapest paper and see how it goes, because hopefully that ink will leave the paper more easily. All right, now we're going to take water, and I'm just going to spray the water on the paper, and I'm going to just quickly try to get most of that paper off, like the thick part in the back. And the closer I get to the actual ink, the lighter I press. Okay, so I'm pressing pretty hard right now, especially in the center of the image, to remove that excess paper. But as I get closer to the ink, I lighten up. Now, when I'm rolling the paper off, I will go from the middle off the edge. And if it gets really dry, just spray it again. Okay, so at this point, I'm not really pressing all that hard. I'm just trying to lift any paper off the ink without disturbing the ink itself. When you first start to, you don't want to spray too much water on the paper because you run the risk of having the water actually going underneath the paper. And if it's underneath the paper, the ink won't stick because water is a release agent. So in the beginning, you will use a little less water until you're sure that that ink is sticking to the clay. Now, at some point you may think that you have removed all the paper. It may look like it, but you know, this is one of those situations where your fingertips are going to tell you more than your eyes might tell you, because you will feel the paper more than you will see it. I'm just trying to get some of it off. Okay. And here again, it looks good, but you know what? I can feel the paper. Now, at a certain point, you should just take it and set it aside and let it dry out a bit. Because at that point, you will also see if there's any paper that should be removed. And if there is, just spray it again and lightly rub the paper off. And I can see some paper there, so I will just spray a bit and rub a bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Once again, I won't really know until it dries out. Of course, you want to remove all the paper from your work surface, because if any of this paper makes it into your clay, you've got problems. Okay, that's good. Now we're going to move on to this one that I did before. And it's been sitting for some time. I know that I got as much paper as I could off because I can see it. And now we're ready to put a very thin, thin, thin sheet of translucent over it. Now what happens, if you look at this, and you look at this, you can see that, of course, this is more brilliant. It's brighter because there's no translucent layer on it. This has the translucent layer on it. But because there's translucent, I'll be able to sand and polish it, which I could not do here, of course. If I sanded this, it would just sand the ink right off the clay. So here is an Inyo box I made, and you can see that it's shiny. Well, that's actually a transfer underneath a very, very thin layer of translucent clay. Now, you do have to be a little careful. See that? I sanded through the translucent, and I removed some of the actual ink, excuse me. And that's why there's that little white spot there. So you have to be a little bit careful. And if you're making a box like this, it's really critical that the clay, before you cure it, is absolutely smooth. I suspect here there might have been a little bubble, just a little raised area. And that's why when I sanded it, I made it nice and smooth. But I sanded away that part that I think was raised. Okay, so let's get going. Now I'm going to take the translucent clay right off the block. This is one of those situations where you wouldn't use, mushed up translucent like this. You see, I used it, and I could roll it out through the pasta machine, but you know what? I'd probably be introducing air into it, and I just don't want to do that. So I'm going to take fresh clay off the block. Move this back a bit. Take my acrylic rod, flatten it. And now I'm going to prepare it. But you know what? I am going to cut here because we're at 13 minutes. I don't want to go too much longer. So I will be back in a moment. All right, now we have to prepare our translucent clay. You want to cut it directly from the block. Do not gather up all those little bits and pieces. That will create problems for you later. Now I'm rolling it through the pasta machine, probably setting number 3 or 4. And let's see what we have. Looks good. Now I'm going to continue to fold and roll, fold and roll, fold and roll, because the clay is not conditioned. Okay, so here we have a situation where it's looking good, but there are little tiny white dots. Can you see those? Little tiny white dots. Those we have to get rid of. Now look, there's still that white dot. That's a little air pocket. Gotta get rid of it. So more folding and more rolling. Now that's looking really good. I think pretty much I got rid of it. But the clay has to have a certain amount of flexibility, a certain amount of stretch. So I'm going to soften the clay by adding some conditioning bar. Okay, you want the clay to stretch nicely. So if it's very stiff or if it's too stiff, it needs to be softened. That's what I'm doing here, softening my clay. Fold and roll, fold and roll. And look, it's looking pretty darn good now. Yep, it is. Good idea to trim it, because from this point, I'm going to have to manually thin it out, because you know what? That is probably been rolled through setting 9 and it is not thin enough. Yeah, so gently pull. All right, then grasp the other two sides gently and gently pull. You're just slowly stretching that clay out. Just gently pull. And if you go very slowly, you will thin that sheet out without ripping it. Okay? At some point, it is going to get so thin that it does rip. But if you work this way, very slowly, just let that clay catch up. Let it stretch out. Okay? And see on my right hand, oh, well, you probably missed it, but there was a little bit of a tear. But still stretching, because we want this translucent clay to be as thin as we can possibly make it. Now, I saw some little white spots. Yeah, well, we're going to have some of those on occasion. We will deal with them later. Okay, but that clay is beautiful. It's nice and soft and nice and thin. Now, because it's so thin, it's easiest to put it on something like that piece of parchment paper. And of course, I let one corner go, so now I have to slowly peel it off. But you know what? If you work slowly enough, you can do that without ripping the sheet. And look, I did it. I did it. I wish my camera was positioned a little bit better, but I did it. Now we're ready to put it on that transferred piece. There it is. Now that piece is stuck pretty well to that tile. That's going to help a lot. Now here you see me struggling to get liquid clay out of my little bottle. Yep. It's not wanting to come out, not wanting to come out, and I believe there is going to be a sploosh here. Yeah, I had to pour it out. There it is. All right, liquid clay. Okay, now this part is very important, guys. Do not forget this. You're going to have to put a very, very light coat of liquid clay on that transfer. And this is what is going to really improve the bond between that transfer and that very, 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 very thin sheet of liquid clay. Now you're going to make sure there are no little bits of paper on it, anything like that, because that's really not what we want. But this is extremely important. Extremely. And don't put too much on. You see how little I'm actually putting on? I'm not putting a lot on there, just enough. You're not going to have a thick coat. Just gently dab, dab, dab it on. Dab, dab, dab like that. Just dab it all over. All right. Now you got to take that thin translucent clay and you're going to have to put it on top. But I want to show you something. You see these light areas on this finished piece? Well, that's where the translucent clay is not really stuck to the transfer. Now, you don't see the same thing on the piece on the right. See, that is on the left. That's not a good bond between the translucent and the transfer. On the right, you don't really see that. Now, on the right, you do see like cracks in the transfer, but that's not the same thing as what we're talking about. Those light areas on the left, on that piece, that is because I did not dab, okay? The piece on the right, I dabbed that liquid clay on, got a nice uniform, bond between the transfer and the translucent clay. Okay, got to clean up a little. Now it's time. Now it's time to take that very thin translucent clay and put it on that transfer. Okay? Now, this is actually pretty easy to do, but it's awkward. It's just a little awkward because, of course, you don't want that translucent clay to fold, right? You just want to get it on there and you don't want any air bubbles between the two pieces. And so it's like sometimes it feels like, oh no, oh no, oh no, air bubbles. Don't worry, we can get rid of them. Sometimes it helps to actually take that translucent clay and just kind of stick it to the tile. And here, you want to try to work and push any air pockets out. So just work slowly and push and push and push, just like that. And work from one side to the other, and you will get the piece perfectly joined. Yeah, I know you will. I know you will. Okay, moving on along. Woohoo! All right. So just keep pushing. Just keep pushing. I'm back again. It was not the lady with the goats. So you might be asking yourself, why am I waiting for a lady with goats? Well, I live in the mountains. Now what I'm going to do is try to get rid of all these little, see, that's air in there. Pierce, push it out. Pierce, push it out. And it's tedious, but it's really important. Okay, so the goats. I live in the mountains. It's dry. We have fires. As a matter of fact, right now, there's a fire south of us. So we have to mitigate. We have to mitigate our property, try to get rid of any grass, dried up grass that might bring a fire right up to our house. And there's a lady who has a herd of goats, and she travels around with her goats, and the goats eat pretty much everything. So it's really a nice way of mitigating, not having to use a weed whacker, and feeding some goats. Okay, so that's the story of the goats, but it was not the lady with the goats. Okay. All right, so you get the picture. I am going to continue with this until I get everything, as much of the air pockets as possible, out. Then we will move on to covering. Actually, what we're going to move on to is getting it off of this tile. Because you know what, you've already seen, if you watch the draping forms, you know how to do this. I mean, you know how to take a sheet of raw clay and put it over a draping form. So when I get back, we will just finish what we have to do to this clay prep. Okay, be back in a few. Okay, I think I got most of the little air bubbles out. So I'm going to take my brass rod and I'm just going to smooth and flatten the surface. Now, I'm not really closing the little pinholes, but I've not noticed that it makes much difference. Okay, so let's just cut everything, get rid of everything around. And it's so thin. Okay, Now let's just get this off. I'm just going to take my blade and I'm pushing the blade down against my work surface or tile. Actually, I have to move this back because this edge of the tile is resting against my belly, so it doesn't move. Okay, got it off. Ta-da! Okay. Now, in order to make this, you remember, if you watch the other tutorial, you're going to take your form and you put Repel gel on it. Oh, I might as well do it. Okay, wait just a sec. Okay, there's the form. Here's the Repel gel. I'm going to take Repel gel, put it on the surface like this. Like so. Uh-oh, not long enough. Not a problem. I'll go diagonally. Still not long enough. Not a problem. Let's just make it longer. Okay. You know, I can stretch it and make it a bit longer and a touch wider. Make it fit. Actually, do I want that corner to corner, or do I want this corner to corner? I think I want this corner to corner. Okay. So I'm going to position that one there and just stretch this down to the other tip. Stretch it out. And see these holes? I don't think I'm even going to see them after it's cured. And I sand. I really don't think I'm going to see those at all. Okay, so let's go on the back and look. Okay, I'm going to take my blade, cut, take the blade again, oops. All right, now this will be cured, and then it will become a piece in a necklace like this. Okay, so thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope this has been helpful to you, and I hope you make a lot of transfers. And definitely check this site out, because they really do a nice job. Some really nice images. Pickrill.com. So until next time, bye. Well, I shouldn't have said goodbye so soon, because I'm back. I just want to show you what we did and some of the options in terms of finishing. Here is the laser transfer. It's bare. It has no translucent clay on it. The advantage of this is that the image is very, very detailed and bright, right? Because there is no translucent clay on top. And the finish is, well, it is what it is. It's not, it's kind of a matte finish, but I like it. Now, I showed you this in the tutorial just to illustrate how important it is to put that thin layer of liquid clay on the transfer before you put the translucent clay. If you don't, you get those splotches in the finish. So it's important to remember that very, very thin coat of liquid clay. Now here, I just want to show you, because I think in the tutorial I said I didn't think that you would see the pinhole at all, and after curing and sanding and buffing just a little bit on my clothing, no, you don't see the pinhole at all. I think it was somewhere around here, but this is fine. Now, in terms of the finish here, I just took maybe 600 grit Abra net, and then maybe 500 grit wet dry sandpaper, and I rinsed it off, and then I buffed it against my clothing. So you see, it's not a high gloss finish, it's just kind of a satin finish there. This is the last thing we did. Now, to this one, I did go through many grits of micro mesh to make this high gloss sheen. And then I did take it to my electric buffer, and that's what happens. And you can see that when you do this, it sort of clarifies and clears the translucent too. So the image underneath is more clear than it was before. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for tuning in, and until we meet again, bye.